What's going on?
Let's get the charger for it.
I'm not comfortable with this. I'm not sure why. I don't know why the board is showing.
Uh,
Uh, not the camera, it's the projector now. Projector is not the camera. No, that need to face me. That's okay. That's now. Yeah, the other one here over there. Okay, okay. Okay, I'm paper back. Adam, let me tell you. And that's tell me. Please let me take that program. Sorry, sorry. I don't think that can even put down. You can split camera to that particular place. Yeah, you can see it.
Good morning and welcome, everybody. My name is Stacey Vanderhurst. I am a associate professor of women, gender, and sexuality studies at the University of Kansas. And it is my great honor to have also served as a visiting lecturer here at University of Lagos in the Department of Sociology as a Fulbright scholar for the past year. I'll be chairing this panel, as has been mentioned, which will address conducting research in Nigeria. I myself have conducted research here for 15 years, off and on as an anthropologist, and I'm excited that we have such a diverse array of disciplines and methods represented in this conversation, and no doubt in the audience as well. I've given our speakers up to 15 minutes to share their initial thoughts, but I'm sure we'll have time for a lively conversation in addition. Can I ask quickly, is Alexander here in person? All right, we have one panelist that we're still waiting for, but hopefully they'll show up as we proceed. So let's start off with Kingsley. Would you mind starting us off?
Hello, good morning, everyone.
Hi, Dr. Kingsley is a environmental archaeologist and lecturer of archaeology and tourism at the University of Nigeria in Nsukka. He obtained degrees from the Department of Archaeology and Anthropology at the University of Ibadan, Nigeria, and he is a 2020 African Humanities Program postdoctoral fellow of the American Council of Learned Societies. Welcome, Dr. Kingsley. I hand it over to you.
Thank you very much. All right, thank you very much. Well, I want to appreciate LSA for inviting me to participate in this roundtable discussion as one of the discussants. As rightly introduced, I am an environmental archaeologist. I'm an archaeologist, and well, when it comes to archaeology, you know, the Americans, there's this argument about archaeology being anthropology or it is nothing. And so which means that archaeology, most of its methods are enshrined in anthropology. And that is to show us that archaeology is actually multifaceted when it comes to the methods we apply in archaeology. So because it focuses more on humans, you know, we're trying to understand humans in this totality, understanding the past of humans. There's several methods we apply in archaeology, which could be scientific, it could be humanistic. And so when we apply these methods, we try to understand humans in their totality. Now, having said that, when it comes to doing research in archaeology in Nigeria, there are several things that come to mind. Well, first and foremost, I had to go for my field work in Nigeria. There are several things I need to put in place. First and foremost, you get your team. Now, who is going to be part of your team? Now, this is very important because it is important for you to be able to assemble good hands, people you can work with. Now, so there are situations whereby you get people when you get to the field and they start giving you problems. So first and foremost, this must be people that you are sure that, I mean, you can work with and they are free-minded. One good thing about archaeology is that when it comes to learning the art of excavation, like one of our major methods we apply, you know, this is something that you can actually learn on the job. So you don't really need specialists to actually be in your team. So like most of the work we do, we usually include or involve local participants, people from the local community. And so we just teach them what to do. And before you know it, within a twinkle of an eye, they already understand what they're supposed to do. You know, when digging, you just tell them, dig around this feature, don't dig into this. And before you know it, they already know what to do. Now, one other important thing is security. Like for some of us that are in diaspora, when we are visiting the country, like in the UK, you have to carry out risk assessment to understand the threats you are exposed to when it comes to your field work. Now, I work in the southeastern part of Nigeria, and I've also worked in the southwestern part of Nigeria. But we know that in the north, it's a red zone. So before you go for your field work, you have to carry out this risk assessment. Because I've never really experienced working in the north, so I don't know what happens. Maybe your field work will be terminated, or you have to wait till maybe a very good time when things are clear. But in the southeast, things happen to be a little bit good and fair when it comes to the state of security. So, but you need to also be cautious of one or two things, like you don't walk around in the night. And also, when an emergency situation arises, what do you do? Where should the assembly point be? You should know about the closest hospital to the site so that if there's any emergency situation, you have to take such a person to the closest hospital. And also first aid is also very important. Now, this is something that some of us overlook when we go to the field. We don't go with any first aid. So there are times whereby an individual could have a snake. So you need to first aid to that individual before rushing the individual to the hospital. Now, aside this, it's also important for you, first and foremost, to even inform the local community where you're working about your visit to the site. Now, I had a very good experience in 2020 when I was still working in the southwestern part of Nigeria. And so we visited this site and we met the Oba. Well, the Oba was not on seat. So we met the secretary and we informed of our intention to carry out excavation in the area and everything. He said, okay, that he's going to inform the Oba when he, when he returns. So we've been making calls and we got the approval that we are free to visit, we are free to come. But surprisingly, on the day of our visit, when we arrived the site with my team, we got a message from the Oba that we should go back because he's not aware of our arrival or what we are coming here to do. Now, this is important because, I mean, you can see in this scenario that there is a bridge and gap. I mean, something is happening. There was a gap in communication because the Oba was not informed of our visit. And this can actually disrupt an archaeological fieldwork, a project. So it's very much important for one to inform the local community and to get the approval. And aside this also, when it comes to archaeological fieldwork, there are necessary permits one meant to get, like from the National Commission for Museums and Monuments. So you don't just go around digging without permit. And after even digging or excavating, the materials you get, you also need an export permit. Well, if you want to analyze those materials in diaspora outside Nigeria. So you also need a permit. So these things are very important to put in place before you actually embark on your field exercise. Now, when it comes to field work, we have the pre-field work, the field work itself, and the post-field work. So some of these things I've just mentioned are things you have to make sure that they are in place before the field work. Now, in the main field work, we have several techniques we apply when it comes to exploration for sites. Some people ask us, I've been asked this question, how do you locate your archaeological site? How do you know that when you excavate this area, you're going to get something? Now, these are things you get from exploration, where you apply some techniques, which could be geophysical techniques, geochemical techniques, and apart from that, even collecting oral history of the site. So when you engage with the local community, they could also direct you on the history of the site that, oh, this particular area, you're likely going to get this because this is the history associated with this particular area. Then you carry out your excavation. And apart from that, aside that, you have your post-field work analysis, whereby after you conclude your field work, you start analyzing your data. One thing I have adopted in my recent field work is to begin your analysis on the field, because you find out that by the time you leave the site, you have a lot of work to do. For those of us who are archaeologists, we excavate, and most of the materials we get are pot sheds. You have to wash these pot sheds, you have to catalog them, you have to carry out several kinds of analysis on those pot sheds. So it's important for you to even begin the washing on the field, the categorization, those are decorated and those are not decorated. So these are some of the things you can do to reduce your work at the end of the day. I also want to emphasize that when it comes to the field of archaeology, there are lots of misconceptions. And archaeology is highly misconceived when it comes to, the idea of the discipline. People think that archaeology, when I worked in the southwestern part of Nigeria, I was confused to be a ritualist. Based on maybe after the field work, we carried our field equipment, and so they didn't know what we were doing. This is something that is even common, not just in Nigeria, but even in Africa and even beyond Africa. Somebody like Amanda Esther Hussein, who published the work in 2000, said, despite several archaeological excavations that have gone on in South Africa, they have sometimes been confused for those who install toilets and electricity. So this is very common. So the misconception is very common. So that is why I think that a new direction in archaeological fieldwork in Nigeria now is about public engagement. informing the public of what do you do as an archaeologist. And this is what I've employed in my research in the last few years, where I've been working in one of the most renowned archaeological sites in Nigeria, Ibuku, in southeastern part of Nigeria, Anambra State precisely. And so we've carried out public sensitizations, archaeological education for secondary school students, because we discovered that this particular archaeological site is located in Ibuku, but some of the locals, especially the secondary school students, don't even know what archaeology is all about. So we felt that to encourage knowledge of archaeology is important for us to catch these students, at their very early ages, to go down to the grassroots. So that is why we carry out archaeology education for secondary school students. We carry out exhibitions, workshops. These are some of the things I have done in the last few years at Ibuku. And by the time you do this, you find out that you're trying to win the trust of the local community. Because when the trust is not there, it becomes a problem. You are being suspected. When you go to the field, they think you want to mine gold or you're exploring for oil. So they need to understand what you are doing as an archaeologist, that you are just interested in reconstructing the history of their ancestors or maybe their past. So by the time you explain these things to them and also involve them in the archaeological fieldwork, in decision-making, in the planning, in the execution, you'll find that they'll be carried along and they'll tend to understand what you're doing as an archaeologist. So involving the local community is actually something that is very important. And when I looked at the abstract of this session, I saw that it was only looking at the relationship with the fellow academics, but archaeology now is beyond looking at relationship with academics. It's also looking at the relationship with non-academics, because academics comes even at the last stage. Because if you don't clear things up with the non-academic community, you're not going to even get your data published at the end of the day. And the academic community is not going to even see what you did on the field. So it's important for the non-academic part of the community to be involved in our research. It's very, very important. And also listening to their perspectives, their interpretation when it comes to your data collection. Sometimes we think that the local farmers, these local people, they are illiterate. They don't understand what archaeology is all about. So when we get some of these materials, we tend to ask them, what do you think? What do you understand by this particular kind of material? What is it telling you? What do you think your ancestors must have used these materials to do in the past? Now, a very good example was, there was one material we excavated from my site in Ibuku. That was sometime about 2 years ago. And we gave it an interpretation. But during the exhibition that we conducted in just a few weeks ago, the local community members gave a different explanation, and his explanation made a lot of sense. So if I hadn't subjected my data to public scrutiny by the local community, that would have been a problem. So this is also very important for you to subject your data to public scrutiny, to involve the local community, to hear what they have to say about their data. So I think these are some of the thoughts I have to share at this particular stage. So I'll wait for more questions. Thank you.
And I'm going to ask that we leave all questions for the end of the session so that the panelists have an opportunity to respond together. Next, I want to introduce Dr. Rukayat Banjo from Bayero University, who teaches performance and film studies. She does research in Northern Nigeria, specifically on theater for development and community theater.
Good morning, everyone. I would like to make a correction there. My research is not focused only on theater for development and community theater, but it is, among other things, performance, basically, and theater and film studies with a focus on carnival. Thank you. I particularly choose to talk on CFD and community theater because of the concept, the conceptualization of the panel. He's talking about field experience. And so I've had more experience doing CFD and community theater than I had in doing field work in film studies. And so that is why I've chosen to talk about CFD this morning and community theater. TFD simply means theater for development. And because we know that we are in the humanities, and I would say that the world is the world of humanities. We deal with humans and social interactions, learning about cultures, learning about the people, learning about the languages. And so there is no way you can remove theater from the study of human things. Because this morning we have all performed, and I am performing. This is not the Ruka, this is the Ruka that is speaking to you. This is not the normal Ruka. So Ruka can be at home sleeping, Ruka can be here talking to you, Ruka can be anywhere demonstrating. And so humanities and theater specifically is human-centered. And so talking about CFD and my research, my experience in the fieldwork, I really got interested in fieldwork in theater and performance in the year 2016, 3 years after I got to Kano to teach. I'm from here, so I can say that I know a lot of things about the Southwest, but the North was alien to me. And so I had to, taking Joseph Mary's concept now of okay, thank you. Now, taking Joseph Mary's concept that says that the best way to know a people is to be like them. And particularly when you learn their language, you gain the citizenship to them. And so I am adopting that for you to gain entrance into any community, you have to learn, you have to pretend, you have to act to be like them. And so penetrating the Northern society in terms of research, I won't say it's difficult, but we know that for every research, there are rules to follow, there are things to be done. And so the first thing for me is identifying what you want to do and how you want to go about doing what you want to do. It's not enough for you to know, okay, this is what I want to do, but the approach, how do you want to do it? What methodology do you want to use? Who do you want to talk to? What perception are you bringing in? What is the idea you are contributing that is new to what every other person has said? And so my first experience was in a community called Tofa community. I'm going to be doing a lot of illustration in my discussion. And we were going to do an intervention program, not because we had the money, but I want you to know that at the heart of every research is empowerment. Opening the people's eye, opening their minds, broadening their minds, it's empowerment. They have a challenge, they have a thing you want to talk about. They may not even be conscious of whatever thing they have, but you are bringing that into their consciousness. And for you to bring it to their consciousness, you have somehow empowered them. And so you cannot take empowerment away when you are doing a field research, because it is knowledge. They don't know what you know. You don't know what they know. They have what you need, you have what they need. And so it is a collaborative effort when you are doing the research work. Just like the first speaker has said, you can't go into a community without the gatekeepers. In Northern Nigeria, we have the people we call the gatekeepers. And so these gatekeepers are the people you knock on their doors to allow you entrance into that community. They do not hold the key, literally, but you have to talk to them, and they talk to the Meangwa. The Meangwas are the district, the head of those communities. And so that is who they are. And if you talk to them, they show you the way to the palace or the Meangwa's house. You can't go to the Meangwa's house without a gatekeeper following you, because the gatekeeper knows the community. The gatekeeper knows you somehow. And so he is the intermediary between you and the Meangwa. And if the Meangwa okays you're coming to their community, that means the community definitely will okay you coming to their community for whatever research you are coming to carry out. And so from my experience, what I will tell you is, can we have a letter to that effect? We have done a lot of letters to various communities that we have gone to do field work. And so you tell them your intent. This is what we want to do. This is how we want to go about it. And you have to keep in mind that cultures differ. And so you are not going there to compare your cultures to their culture. And fine, it is ethnography, it is ethnographic in nature, but it is not ethnology. So you have to be mindful of that. You have to take them the way they are. You have to be culturally sensitive. You have to dress like them. You have to eat like them. Sometimes we've had cases where we use the homestead approach in doing field work with them. What do we mean by the homestead approach? You go to those people, you live with them between the period of 2, 3, 4, 5 days. You eat their food. That way you are accepted and you build trust. When people trust you, they are free to talk to you about whatever, no matter how sensitive that issue is, they are able to open up to you. And so we had the homestead approach, and we began to talk to them. But during our stay in that community, we went there to do an intervention program, definitely for stage performances. Our going to communities is to get data for us to write our scripts for performances on stage, for performances for film, for performances for the radio drama. And so we got there, and I observed that I couldn't see ladies of our ages, you know. They were nowhere to be seen during the day, and we walked the length and breadth of the community. We saw men. We went to the marketplace. It was only men, predominantly men. And so apart from this men, you see younger girls and older women. So what happens to the women in between these age ranges? And so I was forced to ask. Meanwhile, when you're doing research in such a community, it is restrictive because there's this separationist ideology where the males are separated from the females. And so most of their females are in CUDA. They are, you know, they are in there. And so the men are out there and everywhere. And so the females amongst us are allowed to go into the women's room to ask them questions. Sometimes their husbands come policing because they want to hear, you know, the conversations these women are having with you. Are they giving you too much info about that community? What are they saying about the men? What are they saying about their conditions? And so, you know, I said, okay, this is my observation. We are going to ask certain questions. So that refocused, you know, that was a kind of refocus from our earlier intent to another thing. And so we asked a few women, two of these women, that, okay, why are women of your age not out there? They said, it is a taboo in the community for women of their ages to be out there. And, you know, that was the first, I think the first cultural shock I had after staying in Kano for 3 years. And I'm like, okay, if a woman is not supposed to come out, what is a woman supposed to be doing? And so we realized that even the women, as they are home, they are still, you know, there's this form of economical reformation going on. They sell kose from the confines of their homes. They sell awara from the consent of their homes. They knit from the consent of their homes, you know. And so that was impressive in a way. But what's, you know, I was so worried. I was so concerned about they not being out there. You can wear your puda. I know that in Islam, you can wear, you know, your niqab and go out, but they were not permitted to go out at all. And so I asked, they said that it is a taboo for women of that age to go out. Okay, what is, they said, no, that is just the way it is. Nobody was ready to go beyond giving that information. And so I asked, okay, how about these girls going to school? They said, oh, they are just going to school to get potential suitors. Once they get suitors, they are taken off school and they are married off. And so, you know, that informed my first play. It's a short play. I wasn't a playwright, but that was my first attempt at writing a play. And it really, really went far, and I am happy. And so I looked at it that, okay, if a girl child is not allowed to go to school and the women are not permitted to go out, so what becomes of the women folk in that community? And so to verify the authenticity of this data, of this information, I had a student who is from that community. And I asked him, I said, okay, I got this information, I got this data from Tofa community. How true is it? He said, I'm from there. That is the truth, and that is our reality. And I am talking about 2016, and this is 2023. I don't think anything has changed. And so that is, you know, the essence of the homestead approach. They have trusted you. And, you know, we have ethical issues and in research, the consent, the trust, the anonymity, you understand it, you being able to keep their secret and not saying it out there. And, you know, aside from all of this, we have a theater group in that community, because when you go into any community, you must identify the SBOs, the groups in that community that work for the sustainability of the intervention that you have come to do. And so when you are no longer there, because you cannot be there all the time, there will be a time that your period of research will be terminated and you would leave. So these are the people that carry on whatever intervention you have gone to the community to make. And so they report back to you. Peradventure, you want a feedback, you go back to that community, they are the ones you are going to meet. And so this community had a theater group comprising of all males. And we needed somebody to do a female role. What we do is, for it to be an inclusive research, we adopt some of their, indigens and some of ours, so that we can really have that relationship devoid of any animosity. And so we needed a female from them. We didn't want all the females to come from us. And they told us, we do not have females in this group. And we asked why. They said that because our religion, Islam, does not permit it. And I said, okay, so how do we go about it? They said, however, there's a female that we can use. And that female is termed as an outcast. I'll explain what I mean by an outcast. She is somebody that, a man can go to in that context. You get it? And so if you can talk to her, she will be on the team. And so, we didn't need to ask further questions. So when we got to meet the lady, she told us she was not interested in doing it. And so we had to use our students to carry out that experiment involving the community and, and us. And so it is very important for us to know these things and the approaches we need to use. And recently, I'm part of a research team working on the use of psychoactive substances in Kano metropolis, because we realize that some of our students, when they come into the university, they are bright, they are gay, they are on top of their game. And after 1-2 semesters, you see that they are backsliding. And so we had to look into that. What is the reason why this is happening? We realized that some of the students who live directly opposite the university campus in a place called Dambari have joined the gangs of, yes. And so it is imperative that when we are doing this kind of information, investigating gangs and all of these things, their approaches, because these areas are highly volatile areas. You do not want to endanger yourself, endanger your life and your team. And so we won that grant, and we are working on it for a radio program that is going to be aired in probably 3 radio stations in Kano in a quarter. And, doing that research, we realized that psychoactive substance use is not only limited to the youth. Even we have professors who are doing it. And we realize that the women are the most involved. Yes, we realize that the women are the most involved. And who would think that the women in such a society will be involved in such an activity? And we interviewed some of them. They said they do it because they are repressed. And that is the only way they can actually get out of their mood and feel good, because there's nothing that gives them happiness. And one woman, a married woman, told us particularly that her friend just gave her this because she was always falling into depression. And her friend gave her this, that it will make her feel good. She'll forget her worries. And that is how she got addicted. And so there are a lot of other young girls around the university who are from rich homes. And I have had personal encounters with them. And the men around them tell us that in confidentiality, that these ladies, if you want to get to them, the only thing you need to do is just buy, a bottle of this substance and give to them, and they are all yours. And these are the kind of things that we experience in northern Nigeria. And so you have to be strategic, you have to be sensitive culturally, to approaching these issues if you yourself do not want to be in danger. So for now, I'm going to stop because my time is up, and I'm ready to listen up.
Thank you, Dr. Rupat. Already seeing really important themes here emerging of unexpected community engagements, really beyond the original bounds of research projects. Please, if you have questions, do write them down, jot them down so that you don't forget with our next speakers. Next up, we'll have Dr. Alexander Budd, who is an ethnographer of film production, among other things. Has done graduate work at the Open University in the UK and the University of Edinburgh. Please help me welcome Dr. Budd.
Hello everyone. Good morning.
Morning.
I'm actually going to change the beginning of my presentation slightly because what I've heard so far is quite different to what I was expecting. I mean, I thought I was going to be a bit of a black sheep of the panel because I'm the only non-Nigerian here doing research in Nigeria, lecturing to Nigerians about how to do research here. But listening, especially to Ruqayyat, talking about how she was actually doing research in an alien environment to her, I realized that actually maybe we're more similar than I thought. So, I mean, can we have a quick show of hands of people who are doing research in an area that they would consider alien to them? Like an area that's not, a region that's not familiar to you. Anyone else? And anyone who's doing research in what they might consider a home community, and a group of people they're already familiar with. So it's hard to tell, maybe a mixture. Okay, so I'm primarily an ethnographer, and I'm going to be speaking about some different types of ethnographic approaches. Firstly, a sort of classic ethnographic approach, which is sometimes described as participant observation, which involves, yes, being embedded in a community and observing. But when we're talking about new directions in ethnography, I think Ruqayyat also brought in something very relevant, an area that I would call action research, or participant ethnography. A scholar that has been really influential for me with this particular methodology is Karen Barber. And I recommend every one of you, if you're interested in ethnography, to read her work, especially the generation of plays. And this is what inspired me, or one of the major inspirations for me. For anyone who's not familiar with her work, what she did is she came to Yoruba land in the 1980s. She was interested in studying the traveling theatre, and she joined a theatre company. And she became an actress and a general member of the company. So she was acting in plays and later television programs in southwestern Nigeria. And this was an approach that inspired me. So when I came to Nigeria, I was interested in, particularly in sets, in the work of building sets on Nigerian television shows and Nigerian films. So I met a set designer who had a team of maybe about 30 carpenters, painters, other types of craftsmen. And I joined his team. I was with them for about 6 months. And exactly what Ruqayyat was talking about, I think she called it, what was the phrase you used? Was it homestead? Homestead research. I think you said a few days, but actually the longer it is, the more effective it is. So I was with them for several months, and we didn't just work together, we lived together. So there's a huge difference to doing a few hours of research per day to doing research 24 hours per day. So if you can live with the people who you are working with, it will make a huge difference to your research. Even things that you would not consider research, like eating with people, sleeping in the same dormitories as people, washing, showering, every different part of life. If you share these things with people, that is how you get to know people. The process of research is much more about building relationships than it is about specific things like interviews or getting bits of data. I'll mention maybe a slightly more cutting edge form of ethnographic research, which has sometimes been called visual methods, and it's been pioneered partly by a man called John Caldwell, who's done research on the film industry in particularly in America. What he does is he suggests that you can participate with your research subjects, not just in what they're already doing, but in producing some kind of reflexive materials. So in my case, I got a video camera in. I talked to the set designer, Mr. Bedford, about would he like us to start shooting videos, films of his company, of his workers, and he was very keen on the idea. And you can do this in different ways. So you add a level of reflexivity that perhaps wasn't there already, and it produces lots of benefits, because once you start producing something like film, video, even something like blogs, you then can look over it with your research subjects. You can discuss it with them, especially if you're looking at something that maybe you don't fully understand. So I was researching craft skills, and I'm not a craftsman myself, and I'm certainly not an expert in very specialist activities. So by producing these reflexive materials, we could look over them, we could discuss them, they could function as props. And these materials also gave a lot of value to the people I was studying. So they could use it for their marketing, they could use them for training purposes, and I could also use these visual materials in my thesis as well. So these new methods can produce many benefits. I think I won't say too much more. I think was it Kingsley mentioned ethical issues, and there are many ethical issues. Your university will have an ethics procedure, ethics checklist, probably an ethics panel that you will have to go through, which will be helpful to you. However, there are limitations to that, and there will still be situations in which you have to think for yourself and maybe engage with a deeper kind of ethics, because often the ethics that are given to you by universities are closer to what I would call codes of conduct than ethics in a more philosophical or spiritual sense. So I mean, for example, I often was given, I was treated very kindly by all of my main research subjects, and they gave me lots of access, they gave me lots of help to find out about technical functions in Nollywood, how people make things. However, at the same time, I saw a lot of exploitation of workers, especially people not being paid. It was not what I was looking for, but this was such, these labor relations was so important, became so important, you can't ignore these things. But at the same time, the people in charge of the organizations are helping you. And these questions are not really going to be answered by ethics committees. They come down to your own judgment and some kind of deeper deeper form of ethics that maybe we can discuss. So thank you very much.
All right, last, we are going to return to our remote participants with Fullerene Ajibade. Fullerene is a doctoral candidate at the Department of History at New York University. He specializes in African and African diaspora history with broad thematic interests in social history, economic history, and the history of urban mass and popular culture. He is currently writing a dissertation on the commercialization of everyday gambling in Nigeria from the late 19th century to recent times. Welcome, Fullerene.
Thank you. Firstly, I just want to say thank you to LSA for hosting this. And I mean, I honestly didn't expect to see this many people here to have us talk about fieldwork in Nigeria, which is, so I'm really happy to see people here. Thanks to Dr. Darrell Jimba, Dr. Banjo, and Dr. Bud for, I don't know, making my work a lot easier. So it's good to be going last because I guess I don't have as much to say as I would have if I had gone earlier. I think a lot of the conversation so far has covered really important questions about field work and doing field work in Nigeria, which is also a kind of big part, or I think at least conceptually was a big part of my project, which required a lot of time to be spent in gaming shops, gaming houses, gaming kiosks on the side of the road. But I mean, because I'm a historian, at least by training, I've done a lot of work in the archives, and so I'll spend like a bit more time talking about archival research in Nigeria and my experience doing that. I spent a bit of time, about 2-3 months, at the Nigerian National Archives. I went in so blindly, had no kind of idea about what to expect, and I think it was rather jarring. So I think one of the key points for me, at least when it comes to doing archival research in Nigeria, is that one has to be open to negotiation, negotiating access, negotiating costs. I don't know, like negotiating all of those things, while also being aware that the kind of idea of a place that you had, especially the archives and kind of hosting and preserving documents, might not be as in-depth as one likes. So I think I had to not just adjust my dissertation in general, but also adjust my idea of I think what archival research was going to be. I had a better experience in Lagos working at private archives, specifically, and I don't think a lot of people know about this, so I just want to plug it here in case there are other people like me who want to do a bit more work working with newspapers. But the Gani Fawemi Library in Ikeja is really well cataloged, and also I think I found the librarian there to be very helpful. At the Nigerian National Archives, I think newspapers are also particularly helpful, but it was what I found to be the most useful there was working with not just students at the university, but having a very good relationship with the head archivist, as I'm sure like many people in this room perhaps know and have worked with him before. Yeah, so just to keep this short and make sure that we have enough time for questions, I think there was something Dr. Darrell Jimba said that I want to quickly respond to, or not respond to, but also add to, which is about kind of, I think everyone has sort of mentioned this, but the communal aspect of doing research. Archival research, perhaps similarly, but also differently, is very solitary. It's just you and documents more often than not. At least, again, in conception. And then in practice, it becomes a bit more communal, because if one has kind of a good relationship with not just the archivists or the librarians, but with also other scholars, a lot of things get shared. I mean, the documents that I found that I wasn't looking for, but that I thought like someone else that I met at a conference before, that I met at the archives, might need, and I ended up sending it to them, or I sent it over to them, and the same thing has happened to me. So rather important documents actually that I wasn't kind of thinking about. Sorry, there's one more thing I wanted to say just really quickly beforehand, at least for me. There we go. Also, it's also, I think for me, I found that at least both times that I was back in Nigeria, and I was back for about 6 months at a time, total of a year. about a couple years ago. I realized that it was at least the second time, because the first time I didn't do enough prep to go back. I kind of figured that because I was from Nigeria, it would be relatively easy for me to, I don't know, it would be relatively easy for me to gain information in a way. But the second time, I think I needed a bit more prep. I needed a bit more prep, not just because of the context that I was kind of studying, which is gaming and gambling and pools betting and sports betting. And not just because of that and the fact that I fit the mold of the person who tends to be seen as the quintessential gambler. But because that also because that affected the kind of information that was open to me, the access that was given to me, because there was a sort of certain expectation that I was coming into a space to, how do I phrase this? To participate, not as a researcher, but to participate as a gambler. Perhaps that helped and made my work a bit easier, but it also, I think, like informed. It really informed the manner of relationship that I was able to gain with the kind of the agents, the promoters, the gamblers themselves. And I think all of this has kind of informed the kind of work that I'm trying to do now, the shape of my dissertation. And I think this was only possible by doing the research on the ground. There was no other way for like, I think the idea of the dissertation that I had initially going in has completely shifted and changed simply by doing like archival and fieldwork research with people that I thought I understood but clearly didn't. Yeah, so I'll leave enough space for questions, and hopefully we can have a good conversation. Thank you.
All right, that concludes our prepared remarks for the day, which means we're now open for questions from the audience. Please.
Hello, everyone. This is Nick. So it's my first time in Nigeria, but I want to bring back the question about doing field work in unfamiliar area, because actually I want to reflect to my own, so when I started my PhD, so I have a very ambitious project that I wanted to work on India and also like Africa as a comparison. But then the first question I got asked by the professor or tentative supervisor that like why don't you work on China? So I think it's a quite common question for young scholars from the southern country. They will have been questioned that it's difficult for you to do the field work in another like unfamiliar context, where I'm referring to another country particularly. So I want to ask about I don't know, like, because we're now talking about the decolonization, talking about South-South comparison. So I want to more reflect on, to listen to like what the panel would suggest or what to say maybe to the young scholars here, because I already done my PhD, so it's something that's really gives me a very deep impression during the beginning. Thank you.
I'll go first, if that's fine. I remember that at the breakfast table this morning, Dr. Laiwala, Dr. Mujida, and a couple of us were talking about your presentation yesterday, Youth on the Move. Yes. And so I can't remember what led to the conversation, but my thoughts yesterday when I sat here and listened to you was, how easy was it for people who are not from Africa, who are particularly not from Nigeria, to conceive this idea? That was what came to mind. And, when you said your boss could accommodate 15 people, and I was like, oh, how can I go on there? And I have other schedule all through, the conference, that I'm not going to miss out on what I'm supposed to do, prepare for my own panel and all of that. And, it's become so fascinating. And Dr. Laiwala chipped in something that there was a time, I think that was when you did your PhD, that the conversation about the death of the theater was ongoing. And so what becomes the entertainment value of theater once theater is dead? That means the people will, all go to the cinema and the visuals and all of that. And so we talk about you negotiating. It's your colleague. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Oh, okay, sorry.
So I will say India.
Oh, okay. So, how easy for you to negotiate the terrain, a giant terrain, and bring it back to life, and talking about entertainers stage entertainers in Nigeria, particularly in Lagos, who that has been known to be the center of stage performances. I can't talk of the North, the East. I don't think I have seen a stage performance in Northern Nigeria, apart from the one we stage in our department and probably we stage elsewhere within Kano Metropolis. But then, you know, it brings to mind the consciousness that a concept is dying or a concept is not from your own region or your own ethnicity does not mean another person cannot revive that dying culture or is not permitted to go into that culture and do something you have not conceived as, you know, as people who are from there. And so the question of people not, or people going beyond their terrain, you know, in search of knowledge, to produce knowledge, to share knowledge, I don't think should be up for debate. That's it, because ultimately it is all about knowledge production, knowledge generation, and knowledge regeneration. And I think that is the essence of existence. So I think whoever wants to do anything so far is sustainable should go about it.
So maybe can I just add one?
Okay.
So actually my point is that it's quite common for instance, like for the European or American researchers to come to China, to Nigeria, to India to do whatever they want. So there won't be any question, especially when you're studying in the European university, which I did myself. But my point is they would question me in the beginning, asking, how can you do India? You know, even though the scholars coming to China, to India, they don't necessarily speak in the language, apart from maybe anthropologists. So this is my point to raise, that I think it's also something that we need to decolonize, especially from the mind. So I would encouraging the young scholars here, like please thinking about the possibility to do your field work. Of course, about Nigeria is great, but even within Nigeria, you have very unfamiliar side. But also please think about possibility to do like other African countries or even Asia. So we were trying to organize another Asia workshop next year to encouraging the Asian and African kind of young scholars to think about this kind of South-South comparison. Thank you.
I think that's really interesting because anthropology for so long was premised on the idea of an outsider going in, that you had to be from the outside, and to reverse course so extremely that you actually can't be from the outside, or at least not from the South, going to other place is obviously not the right answer. I'd encourage everybody to think of the ways that we are all insiders and outsiders at the same time. That even if you're doing research within your community, even if you're researching your community within your community, by the fact of being an academic and bringing the lens that you have, you're in some ways going to be an outsider. So it's important that we interrogate all of those categories and identities and relationships that we bring to our work. All right, another question.
The director to Dr. Kingsley. You talked about security. Digesting what you are saying, I'm trying to ask this question. In a situation whereby you have gotten a permission to excavate whatever you want to excavate, and at the end of the day, after digging some materials, have you ever faced with the community asking you or telling you that, okay, this particular thing, you can't go away with it? Maybe because they believe that it may have a bad consequence to the community, or for whatever reason, they are just not pleased for you to take it away. That was one. The second one, have you ever faced with the youth, especially within the community, thinking, quote unquote, maybe you are going to sell this thing in Europe for millions or whatever, and they are asking you, you have to drop something. And when you ask them, it's a huge amount of money that you are like, where is it coming from? Have you ever faced with a situation like this, even back right here in Nigeria that you are from? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. And well, in archaeology, anything is possible. So what you just said is something that is very common, although I have not really experienced something like that, whereby you excavate some materials, you are being told that, oh, this material, you can't go away with it. In fact, the recent excavation I did in Ibuku, I just completed about some days ago, we recovered some very fantastic materials, some pottery that had very unique decorative motif. Now, one thing we did, well, even before the excavation, was exhibition and workshop. What I did in that exhibition was to invite compound owners, people whose compound we worked on in the previous excavation, to see the materials we excavated, that, hey, these materials are still in Nigeria. We have not taken the materials abroad. And so one of the compound owners came, he saw the materials we excavated from his compound, and he was very grateful. So I think this is where transparency comes to play, whereby you are transparent with everything you do. Like I mentioned earlier, there is a need for you to win the trust of the community. And this is something that doesn't come easily, especially when you are not a local or an indigene of that community. Even if you are Igbo. But when it comes to Igbo land, they'll say you are Imo State, you are from Imo State, you are from Anambra, you are from Enugu. So these are different, areas in Igbo land. And so some kinds of discrimination may even come to play. So I have not experienced such. So even the compound I worked on, I had to speak with Her Royal Highness because we worked on a compound of the former, we call them Igwe, like the king of the local community. So in the previous excavation, I had to take permission. Her Royal Highness, these materials, please, I want to take them abroad. And obviously, I'm going to bring them back. They are not going to end up in the museum, in the British Museum or elsewhere. So with that conviction, with that discussion needs to take place. So by the time they give you the permission, you are free to take it out. Now, when it comes to compensation for youth, having this issue with youth, I have never experienced such. Again, it comes to involving the local community. Like before I do my work, I go through the king. They speak with the youth, they speak with the local community. And one thing I have experienced is doing research in the Southeast is quite different from doing research in the Southwest. I have worked in Yoruba land for quite some time. My PhD was on Orile Owu in southwestern part of Nigeria. Well, after my doctorate degree, when I started working at the University of Nsukka, I shifted to the eastern part of Nigeria. So the way you have been received in Yoruba land is quite different from the way you are received in eastern part of Nigeria. In fact, in Yoruba land, once you have the Oba's permission, anybody can allow you to work in their compound. They are very receptive, and it is wonderful. So once you have the permission of the Oba, like the Olowo of Owu, where I worked on, I could access any compound. But in Igbo land, it is not as easy as that. Even if the Igwe has given his permission, it's due to the nature of the society. In Igbo land, we have an acephalous system. But in Yoruba land, the king, once his authority is, whatever he says is like final. But in Igbo land, in my compound, no, even if the Igwe says you can come and work, I, as an Igbo man, you can't come and work in my compound without my permission. So these are two different tribes. So if you're able to understand this system and you know how it works, you're not going to have any issue at all. So I hope I've been able to answer your question.
Hey, sorry, I don't think there's any sound, by the way, from the, like on Zoom, we can't hear any sound from the hall.
Yeah, we're not hearing anything from.
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Yes, we can hear you now.
Thank you. So the question here is on that last question or comment on insider and outsiderness. As long as we're not overlooking the realities of whiteness and knowledge production in the academy and attendant hierarchies of privilege and power. And then the next is to Dr. Rukayat. Says, you said you've not seen stage performances in Kano. Apart from what you see in your department and in Kano Metropolis, please, I hope you do not suggest that Northern people do not have traditional performances which take place on their traditional stage. Or is our concept of stage performances limited to the proscenium arch?
Okay. I'll rephrase. I appreciate that question. Know that every society, every community have their traditional performances. And the prevalence in the northern part of Nigeria is the festivals that they highly regard, the performances that come when they are having their marriage ceremonies, especially for the women folk. And there are other performances that come up during the Ramadan. They call it Tashe. It used to be very, very prominent, but now it is reduced due to insecurity and a lot of other issues. And so when I'm talking about stage performances, I am talking about people, outsiders now. Yeah, I'm going to use that outsider, insider dichotomy now. People who have come from outside to gather data, to put them together into a performance and stage. That is what I'm saying. Fine, there are shows. Yes, they call them shows. But I have not seen them advertise a stage performance, a stage play. That is what I mean by staging performances. They have shows where they invite a lot of comedians from Lagos. They have shows where they invite a lot of up-and-coming artists to come and sing. But in all of these shows, I've attended quite a number of them invited, but I have never seen where people come on stage and say, we are doing drama. No. And so what I'm saying is that their performances are restricted to their local communities. And how much of that do we have these days? That is the question.
Thank you.
Sorry, could I quickly respond to the, because I don't want us to like skip this question, it's really important. The one that Victoria asked about the insider outsider thing, because it's also related to the second question that someone asked me, which is in the chat, which says, can you please elaborate on the cost and access negotiations with the National Archives, what are the costs involved? So, I mean, the insider-outsider thing, especially when it comes to race, I think I find very fascinating. So, because we love anecdotes in Nigeria, I'll use one anecdote to like describe this. When I got to the National Archives, I don't know, perhaps because of the way I was presented initially, one of the archivists thought I was Black American. I wouldn't say understandably so, for some reason, but they thought I was Black American. And that, of course, impacted the amount that they like told me, you know, that costs access to the archive. I can't remember exactly how much it was, but let's say it was like 25,000. It was perhaps a bit less. And then there was someone else I knew there, and I started speaking to them in Yoruba. And he was like, like and I think the immediate switch and the amount went down from about 25,000 to like, I don't remember how much it was between 3,000 and 5,000. That to me was mind blowing. Not just because I don't think the same thing would have been done to like a white German scholar, but because it was being targeted specifically to another Black person in a Black country, simply because that person was from another nation state. To me, it was ridiculous, because what you find there is that like the definition of like an outsider doesn't just relate to race, but relates to also nationality in a way. I don't know, perhaps it might have been different, say I was like Black South African or Black Zimbabwean or something, I don't know. But I'm really fascinated by like the question that Victoria asked about, you know, the reality is that like being white in a way, studying Africa gives you a certain kind of access that perhaps someone from the exact country might not get. I might not get the same kind of access that you will as a white scholar in Nigeria, and I'm Nigerian. For me, it's like I don't know. I mean, I don't think, of course, I don't necessarily think it simply has to do with the mentality thing, but perhaps it also has to do with like as Victoria said, the questions of power. Like, what kind of power and privilege do you bring in as a white scholar? What kind of power and privilege did the archivist assume I was bringing in as a Black American scholar? What kind of power and privilege do they understand me to have as a Nigerian studying Nigeria? I don't know. I think these are questions we tend to like ignore and skip, but they really inform the kind of work that's being produced about the continent by both people on the continent and both people outside the continent. I think these are like, we really need to interrogate this, perhaps not just like in a discussion like this, but in an actual like printable and readable format, you know? Yes, exactly. Sorry, I'm looking at another question, but sorry, that's all I have.
Thank you. I want to make sure I'm not missing question in the back. Oh, there's one more. Okay, then we'll do 1, 2, 3, and 4 in that order.
So this is when conducting field work on sensitive and taboo topics, how do you recruit participants? How do you navigate community bottlenecks? And how do you deal with violent community members or leaders generally? Oh, I have to say that again. When conducting field work on sensitive and taboo topics, how do you recruit participants? How do you navigate community bottlenecks? And how do you deal with violent community members or leaders generally?
I think I would say that recruiting participants stems from your team. That's the first thing I would say. You don't want to go to a community with a bunch of people who do not really know that community, who do not have relationships with that community. And first, that is why you have to know the gatekeeper, know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody in that community. That way, I cannot say that your protection is guaranteed, but to a certain level, to a certain degree, you know that your protection is guaranteed. And the question of what do you ask and how do you ask the questions you ask? I'm sure you don't want to go about attacking them that, okay, probably you have heard certain things about that community because there must be a reason why you have chosen that community for research. And so I know that things change when you get to the field. You see other things, you hear other things that would, change a little the course or add to the course of your research. And so when you are doing such topics, I did not set out to do topics of such, but it was by accident. I stumbled on them and I think they are valuable. And so when you are doing such topics, like no male Northern Nigeria will agree that their women, their married women are use psychoactive substance. They will not. And so you don't want to go to that community saying that I have heard this. No. Something led us to it, our students. And mind you, when we started out on this research, we did not go to the communities straight up. You have to inquire about the people that are close to you, that are members of that community or that have affinity with that community. And so that was how we started out. And when we are sure of, meeting the May Angwa, we wrote to the May Angwa that, okay, we observe that certain things are happening because there are consequences of all of these actions. We realize that in that area, there are certain times you cannot walk. People get killed every day while these killers thief their property, particularly phones. And if you are a woman, you are more prone to all of these dangers. And so you don't want to walk alone in that environment because it is highly volatile. And so when we walk in that area, we walk in groups. It is easier to attack a single person than a bunch of people. And so when you want to go into such environments, you have to be careful. You have to choose your words. And that is why a lot of times your research assistants matter. Who are your research assistants? How conversant are they with that culture? Because you want to go with people who know this culture, who know how to approach addressing these issues. I cannot go to a community in Kano, no matter how long I've lived with them, and tell them I want to know. I must meet the gatekeeper. And this gatekeeper, most of them sometimes, you have to do something for them. They could be entrepreneurial, but you have to do something for them. And, they know of your intents, but to what extent do they know of your intents? And so a lot of times, I would say we act, for those of us who are in performance arts, we act to gain entrance. And when we gain entrance, we begin with the less troublesome questions or inquiries. And from there, they open up to you. Once you gain, I've said it before, we've had a situation where we interviewed Imiangwa on some of these issues. But how was he able to open to us on these issues bedeviling their society? And so when it comes to recruitment, the kind of people you have on your team will dictate how far you will go with your research. And they will dictate the quality of data you will get from them. And so you have to know that when you're going to a community, regardless of who you are, especially as a woman, you cannot go alone. You must, by all means, do not go alone, no matter the nature of your research. You have to go with a male or males, and those males must know, the laws of the land. Fine, there are communities. Okay, I remember a time we were doing a research in the host community of the university. And they chased us away. We didn't get entrance, despite the fact that we had earlier met the Meangwa, the gatekeeper, and we had sent letter out to the Meangwa, and we had a date, and we did not get entrance. Why? Because the Meangwa, had a meeting with some of its chiefs, and they discovered that they accused the university of land grabbing. And so the animosity between the university and the host community is there. So how do we resolve this? Till date, we are still not able to do that research because the university will not open up. The most we got from the university was that they gave their great-great-grandfathers some money. And how do you account for such? The university had it documented because they're intellectuals. They will have a contract, but the people will not have documents to back these things up. And so the university is claiming that it is our land. They have signposts everywhere. And, the villagers are grumbling that this is our land. So how do you resolve that? And so the animosity is lingering and it's still there. And so these are the issues that if you want to, some may not even get approached at all. You will just abandon the research because you don't want to spend years doing that. And so on violence, you have to go, your security. I'm not saying that we have the police, the vigilantes, but sometimes we have the local vigilantes that will report to you. Especially in my area, we had an intervention recently, and the vigilante were part of it for protection because they know the people. It is the people who have appointed this vigilante, even though we pay them from our pockets. But these are the issues, and this, is how we have approached them. For the bottlenecks, it's all a matter of bribing them, gifting them. It's part of research. You want to, commit to the financial aspect of it. And these are all the things you must factor into your budget. Sometimes they will not ask, but giving them will grant you an easy access. And sometimes you would want to, use your position or title as a university teacher. They will say, oh, she's Malama Dagamakaranta. She's Malama from the university. And, you want to dress it. You want to appear it. You want to speak it. And so all of these things are ingredients that would give you access and make your research easy.
Yes, I could add a few words on the issue of recruiting local people when it comes to sensitive topics. I was doing some research in Arby Estate, and I was interested in the phenomenon of the building of large houses, because these are used often for film sets, and they've actually enabled Igboland to become a major location filming centre. I was very interested in going to what was described as the most developed village in the region, which is Abariba, in the north of Arby Estates. And it was extremely difficult to recruit anybody to go to this place from any bordering towns. So when Rukiat said you need local people, it needs to be it might be people from that specific village. People from the area, from the surrounding area, may be even unhelpful. I managed to recruit a few people for the trip, but on the morning of the trip, I started getting phone calls. I've got malaria, I've got typhoid. Every single person suddenly got sick, they can't come. So it left me and the driver and one guy who actually came from that village. And we went, but even the guy from the village and the driver said, we're only going there on the condition we don't consume anything throughout the whole journey. We're not going to drink, we're not going to eat once we get there. So we went there, and we were welcomed. What's complex about the issue is that the main concern was not, the concerns were somewhat shrouded in silence, but the main concern was not about any kind of material danger, it was more of a spiritual danger. And these kind of dangers are not are not is not something that a social science department educates people on how to protect yourself from. You get more insight from religious leaders, maybe, or your own religion, or your own spiritual defenses. I mean, we were welcomed by the king. We were announced by the king. He received us. It was nice. But we were also taken to a place under, there's like a big tree, like the oldest tree in the village. And under the tree was a kind of, you can't see exactly what it is, but it's covered by a canvas, like a massive tent. And it had a power to it. And we didn't go anywhere near it. The people I was with wouldn't go anywhere near it. It was somewhere we stayed well away from. But what I can say to I think what the answer to the question is academics cannot tell you how to protect yourself from spiritual dangers. It comes down to other protections, maybe bravery or foolishness, I don't know. But probably us on the panel can't tell you how to deal with that situation.
All right, thank you. In the interest of time, what I'm going to do now is collect at least those 4 questions that I've seen hands for a while and give the panelists an opportunity to respond to those. So first.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. I am Chukwuebuka Ugu from the University of Nigeria, Nsukka. I'm really impressed with what Dr. Kingsley said about different localities conducting research, especially with reference to Igbo land. And then what you said about giving them money and bribing them. So I want to ask, how do you authenticate sources, especially in Igbo land, whereby some people will come out and then demand that you give them money first, and then this amount may be so outrageous. So how do you authenticate your sources? And then the challenges involved, like, they will say that if you not give them money, they were not going to tell you anything. So if you actually give them money, or if you don't give them money, how are you sure that what they are saying is the right thing, is the correct thing, the real thing? So I want to have your take on this.
Before we get a response on that, I'll invite I think this week and hear all of these coordinated.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Oluwatosin Adeyemi from the University of Ibadan. And I want to appreciate the panelists for sharing their experiences and for the different insights across different fields. My question is a bit similar to what he's asking, but I just want to be a bit direct. So I would like to ask how each one of you, how do you handle the economic factor in your research? Economic factor in the sense that aside from the archival payments, probably where you're collecting the result and the document, you have to pay some fees, then the fieldwork itself. Then how do you also, when you have to probably pre-data, or you have to do data analysis, probably you have to give someone to help you do all that. So just the economic factor in it, because I don't think anyone addressed that, maybe in terms of funding or probably your own personal funds. And I think that's all. Thank you.
Especially in light of the team that can do so important. It's important to think about how we're compensating those people. Oh, there were 2 more hands.
Yes.
You ready?
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. My question is related to Dr. Rupert. I'd like to know what you mean by SBO, to identify SBO. That's number 1. And secondly, you told us to eat their food. Yes, we're able to identify with them. I once experienced drinking a particular water somewhere and I returned back treating myself. Now, in the place where we have research to carry out and it's ritualistic prone kind of. So at what point do you draw the curtain of drinking something they're giving offering to you or kind of food? How do you politely say no to that and still get the fact, the data you're looking for? Thank you.
Thank you. And there was one more question here.
Thank you. On the issue of negotiating and navigating access to archival materials, So I would like to ask, especially this is directed to Polani Ajibade, right? Who says he's a gambler. I would like to know if he had this experience. Like myself, when I was collecting data in Southwest here, I realized that there's competition going on between these activists. So I was trying to be discouraged by a particular activist that I shouldn't try to go to Southeast. That is expensive and it's kind of dangerous because of insecurity and the likes, and the North side as well. And these are the places I've itemized I have to go. So after negotiating the cost, the next thing was like, okay, where again do you like to visit? I mentioned places, it's okay, but I wouldn't want you to go there. So why wouldn't want me to go there? Because I was like, maybe as perceived as an international researcher, probably I wouldn't know the terrain. Then I'll be subjected to whatever advice or information is giving me. So it's okay, I've heard you. So I want to know if he himself, Ajibade, had this experience, because to me, I've seen that as a competition in the market. It's a business now. They are trying to draw attention of researchers only to Southwest, especially when it comes to the fact that you have to engage yourself in archives in other parts of the country, right? I want to know if there's any other, experience like that. But for me, it's a competition going on in the market. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, your responses to these 4 questions, and then now we are last on the street, your panelists. Let's try to everybody, the top something is here. We're around for a few minutes. You might have our panelists and other panels as well. So please state your other questions if you have any later today.
I was so sorry that the speakers are not that. No. In the next we're going to have speaker. Like this.
Okay, there's one more question here. Can we just okay.
Okay, CBOs are community-based organizations or groups. Yes. Yes. Some of them can be youth clubs, CBO, community-based organizations or groups. Yeah. And so talking about eating with them and drinking with them, I think that to gain the trust of the people, at some point, you may have to at least drink with them. That is gaining and building trust. Yeah, it is okay for you to live with them, but you can live with people. Can you live with people you don't trust? And yes, if you come visit me and I give you food and you reject it today, or you are picky about what I've served you, trust me, I do not trust you. Yes. And so for the sake of knowledge, you will have to compromise. To the yeah, to what degree is what I cannot say. So it is left to you now. I particularly do not fancy some of the foods, but at some point I have had to eat and drink with them. And so this is how to build trust. What probably can you do for them? You are the one who need them, and you have to, in one way or the other, look for how to get the information you need from them. It may not be much, you get it, but it can be a drop. You can tell them to give you pure water. I think to an extent, pure water is clean. And in the northern part of Nigeria, particularly in the rural communities, if you get a sachet of water, that means you are privileged. You are rated highly. Yeah. And I think that when that is being given to you, you should reciprocate it. It's a sign of love, it's a sign of acceptance. And so how much you want to be accepting is left to you. So sometimes you may have to compromise to gain the knowledge you want. And I didn't get your name. Yeah? Okay, Mr. Ebuka, I did not mention bribery. Do you get it? Yeah, I did not say bribery. Appreciation, compensation. You get it? It is, yes. We know how far these things go.
In fairness, no one has asked me for anything. No one. Not the Meangwa, not the gatekeepers, not the participants. But sometimes when you go to these communities and you see the situation of things, and because you know you will need them again, even if not for that community, you may build contacts that will be useful for you elsewhere. You get it? And so you may want to appreciate them or compensate them for whatever thing it is. It does not necessarily have to be money. It can be probably a piece of clothing. It can be a hula cap. It can be probably a bracelet for the woman. It can be, they appreciate all of these things. And I tell you, when next you go knocking, their doors are widely opened. You get it? And so when you are in such a community, regardless of the volatility, regardless of how unclean, because some people may say, oh, Hausa people are this. No. You get it? No matter how they are, you must build a relationship, a trust relationship with them. And so a lot of houses I get to in Kano, I do not speak much Hausa myself, and I've been there for 9 years. But when I get there, they say, Antirukayamu, our Antirukaya. So it takes a lot for a Hausa person to call you our. That means you have become a part of them. And so a lot of times when I go there and they give me food, I know that the food is not so, but I have a taste. It's community. And so, Oluwaseun, I hope that answers your question.
Okay, sorry, we're really close on time, and this is LSA, so I'm not going to be pushing delays any much. Can we just hear quickly from our other panelists? And please do carry on these conversations. There's a reason we're here for so many days together. Online, Dr. Kingsley.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much, Ebuka, for your question. Ebuka from UNN. Now, how do you authenticate the information they give you because you think you've given them money, you've bribed them or something? And I thank you, Rukayat, for correcting that. It is not bribe, it is compensation. Now, the thing is, you don't just end up with interviewing one person or using one person as your respondent or informant. By the time you interview a couple of persons, a reasonable number, you will see what is consistent with the narrative. And by the time you start seeing some discrepancies, you'll be able to tell, saying the true times, the common narrative does not necessarily mean that is the correct information. So, but these are things you can also subject to different analysis and cross-check with different sources to see which one is real or not. Then quickly, how do you handle economic factor? Now, for my fellow panelists, you apply for grant, and to be honest, sometimes you do have some extra money. And in some places you spend less, some places you spend more. So you just balance the equation. Some places where you have spent less, you use the money to make up for the other. And also, you don't just apply for just a grant. You have to, throw your net, cast your net into, a wider reach. Make sure you apply for different grants, get different sources of funding and not just a single source. And I think by the time you do that, you'll be able to get enough money for your research. Now, we know that sometimes when you go to the field, especially in the present situation in Nigeria, things are becoming more expensive. So when you're trying to, compensate your local informant, you also have to put that into consideration, that if you're giving just 1,000 naira, you have to also consider what will they do with 1,000 naira in this present economic situation. So you have to be generous in giving out this compensation so that at the end of the day, they'll be happy with you. And when you go to the site next time, they'll be very happy to receive you and give you whatever information you need. So I think I need to end here so that Colin can also say something.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Sorry, sir, I didn't get your name. The person who asked me the question, but I also don't know if I'm the best person to answer this because most of my research is based in the Southwest. But I saw in Professor Aderinto, who's animality and colonial subjecthood, deals with archives kind of across the country. Perhaps he has a better response. But I'm sure there's competition because they're kind of struggling for limited resources, right? Of course, apart from the fact that Ibadan is the headquarters, there's a situation where they're not being funded, or at least the funding they're receiving from the government is little to nothing, So I think there is very obviously some kind of competition between, I don't know, the archives in Nigeria, whereas I would argue that they should kind of coalesce under one body. Negotiating access is really about that, I think. I don't know, figuring out who to talk to and when to talk to them and how to talk to them. And just a quick correction, I am not a gambler, I wish. But I don't have the I wish, but I don't have the patience, and I don't like losing money, and I'm a student and I'm broke, So
Yeah.
I really enjoyed our discussion about the outside and inside. I think that's a discussion we can continue. That, for me, that was the highlight, I think.
I was waiting for your response, but then.
Yes, I'll give it time. Thank you.
All right, please help me in thanking our fabulous panelists here.
Thank you, everyone.
My colleague Ying, who did the theater tropes.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
He's holding it.
Yeah, something like that.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, so here's the one.
I think that's great. Oh, okay. All right, thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much. Bye.